So let's take a look here at this reference image and let's add some floating details that we're going to bake into the normal map onto that area here. For that we can reuse what we already have. Let's select these bottom faces and let's duplicate them, snap back, and then we separate that selection. I'm going to put the quick origin here in the center so that it's easier to navigate around with it. And now we got to flip these normals, and what I want to do is right click on that and then let's add that to our quick favorites because we're using that quite frequently too. So now I'm going to do an inset and then hit Ctrl and I and select the faces as well as delete them that are surrounding it to make that a bit smaller. And then we can have another inset, and as we press Ctrl, we bring that here to the bottom and then we make another inset and collapse it. So that way we already have this detail here in place. And now let's just select the outer edges for it. And let's push it a little bit further up so that we have some curvature on this detail. I'm gonna select everything with face mode, scale it a little bit here on the Z-axis, and then bring it a bit closer here to where we want to bake that on. Now we can work with the bevel modifier. Let's apply that through the JMesh. And let's add it with an offset of 0.1. And since that seems to work fine, let's add a subdivision surface on it to make it high poly. Let's increase the resolution to 2. And then we have this as a detail here right under where these screws are, so that it actually also makes perfect sense when you would take that rail off, which you can do later on because it's going to be a separate thing on it. Now, since we're already working on these small details, let's make a copy of this plane here and separate it out, and then let's just do the quick origin on it. So that way we already have that in place here. And let's just push these vertex points here to the same spot where we see it there on the reference image. And now simply with extrude, we drag out more edges here. Let's just enable this inner barrel so that we see where the intersections are. And then let's give that a bevel here. Now, what we want to do in order to get some depth on that is go over and we're going to use the solidify modifier. And as you can see, we got to do a bit of adjustment here. I'm going to put that to 0.3. So what we can do is change the offset so that this is not intersecting so much, but it's still sort of like originating out of the center, as we can see here. And I haven't found a way to tell it specifically that it should only originate from one side. So what that means is we got to give it a bit of a squeeze here and make sure that this is perfectly aligned. So this is how we can do that, and that basically takes care of this detail already. So let's work on our trigger, and you can see I put the silhouette, what that roughly looks like there at the inside. I'm gonna add a cylinder here to our scene, and then let's put the radius to around 20. Let's rotate that around, and now let's put the edge count here to 48. So we're gonna start with a cylinder, and let's also put our depth down here. I'm gonna have it at 5. So let's see what that looks like here. And it looks like we can increase that a bit. So instead of 5, I'm gonna have 8. And now you can see it looks like it fits perfectly. We still have a tiny gap to the sides, and this is what we want. So now let's scale that so that this shape here already fits. Let's position that, and now we have this nice circle here already fitting that shape. So that's going to be a good starting point. So I'm just gonna put the Z dimensions back to 8 because we were scaling that. And now, sorry, I forgot to put that shortcut plugin on for a short segment. Let's select the front face here and then Ctrl I to inverse the selection, and let's delete the faces behind it. So we're only left with that circle, and now we can do an inset on that. Push that a little further over here and then give it a bit of a scale here on the vertical axis. Position that a bit further. So then when we have that in place, let's delete that face as well as these faces here that don't really contribute anything to our silhouette. So we're gonna get rid of it. And then we have a little bit of manual work to do here. Let's switch over to our vertex mode. So then we just want to make sure that the silhouette matches as good as it can. Let's make this nice and smooth so that we don't have any like zigzagging steps there. So it's all about getting that silhouette here right. So once we get here to the upper part, turns out that we have an extra face here that we don't actually need. So let's simply get rid of it here. Let's delete that. And now let's take a look at it here at the bottom. And currently what I want to do is select these vertex points and make it a bit of a better edge flow. For that, I'm gonna use the vertex slide here. And that way we can position it a little bit further here to the upper side. And that will just result in a better topology here for that. So that we don't have this sharp angle that's pointing all the way down. This way we have it a bit more evenly spaced. And now we can get out of this vertex slide and continue to work here on that silhouette. So now let's go back here to the upper part, and I actually want to delete this upper row here, because we already have enough in place here as it is. I'm gonna connect it like this here, dissolve a few edges. This one here, let's connect it like that and also get rid of this edge here. So that way we have a bit more space here to make a simple extrusion. So let's select this edge and then simply extrude it out here to the right side. So we want to have a bit of this trigger here sticking to the inside, but we won't be having to put all these details that we see there on the silhouette for the inner parts of the trigger. As long as we have a little bit of it sticking out or sticking in, this is really all that we are aiming for here. So let's push that like that, and now I'm gonna delete this edge here, so that it makes it easier for us here to do some bevel on it without creating a big mess. And let's do that here. Let's make that round. So let's make an extrusion up here based on this edge. And just gonna pull that vertex point a little further here to the right side, as well as making a connection here, and then we can fill this empty space back up here. Let's select that and press F, and now I want to dissolve this upper edge here. Let's dissolve that, and then let's take that vertex point and let's bring that a little bit closer to each other here. And let's take a quick look at what we have. I think we can pretty much leave it like that. We just need to do a few more connections here. But other than that, we have most of the parts here on our silhouette that we want to have. And now we can take that, extrude, snap back, and then since it's already perfectly straight, all we have to do is put it to 0 here on the Z transformation. So now let's put on the mirror modifier. And then we want to make a bevel on these loops here. at the side of it, and also this one edge there at the bottom. Let's also take that. So I'm gonna bevel with 2 segments, and also I want these vertex points here at the bottom to almost meet. So now we have 4 vertex points here, and let's simply collapse it down so that we have merged that. And then we can carry on by making a face selection over here. And let's do an inset on it, but let's put the boundary off. So that way we can work on it here as one segment only, and we want to extrude to the inside. And then I want to take these edges here and do a bit of cleanup work. Let me just double check that I'm only selecting here the inside. And once we have that, we want to dissolve these edges. So not only do we optimize it that way, but now we can connect it like that. And it actually looks as our reference image looks, where we have this straight face there at the back and we don't have it like a curvy shape. Now let's take this edge here and let's just bring that up a bit so that it's not so perfectly 90-degree angle, but a bit more round, at least from that side perspective. And we can do the same thing over here. Let's take it until that point. We still have the boundary checkbox off, so that way it comes as one segment. I'm gonna dissolve these edges here at the top and bottom, and now let's extrude to the inside like this here. So now we can do the same thing as at the other part. We're gonna dissolve and then simply put these edges a little bit like this here. So once we have that in place, let's get out of the isolation mode. And if you look at the reference, we have this tiny cylindrical element that's a part of the trigger. So what we can do in that case is take that piece that we already created here at the front side. Let's just copy it here with Shift D. And now we just want to pull these vertex points further here to the left to make that a bit bigger. And then we can rotate it according to our reference image, as well as scaling it up like this here. So let's position that like that. And now it's sticking definitely a bit too much in here. Let's put that to local mode. And then let's drag it so that it's sort of like sitting here on that surface. So I think that is already enough for that. So let's take another look at our reference image. And you can see that the trigger is sort of like bent there, where at the top part it's not as wide as at the bottom part. For that, let's select these faces here, all of them together. And then let's go into the front view and let's push these further here to the right side. And now we can individually select some of these edges, and we want to give it a bit of this curvy edge flow. And we can also do that here by dragging that a bit to the left. So that way we have this nice shape on it. And I'm just gonna select all the points here on the right side, aside from the ones in the center, and let's bring it a little bit closer to the inside. So that way we have our trigger here pretty much done. And now we just want to also put a pivot point on that. So what I'm going to do is select this vertex point and that one. And let's do that in the center only, so that we have the pivot sitting there in the center. And then let's assign the quick pivot to it. And now you can see that this is intersecting a slight bit. Other than that, it's working fine. What we can do in that case is select these vertex points here, and let's just push that a little bit further up here. Remember, our reference image is not always 100% one-to-one. And in a case like that, it might be that we have a bit of perspective on it. But now when we rotate that, you can see it's working fine. Same as here on that other part of the cylinder. And now let's work on another small piece. We're just gonna take care of these smaller pieces now. For that, let's also start with a cylinder, as we do so often. I'm gonna put 24 sides on it. Let's put that radius down to 4 and the depth to 2. Let's rotate that around. And then let's put the transformation back to global. That makes it easier here to navigate that around. And now there's one thing I want to show you in just a moment. Let's just drag that out here like that. So now let's select our reference image. And just to make it clear, when we're zoomed in, we have a bit of an angle on this tiny piece right now. What we can do is go over to Item and then carefully adjust it here. I'm gonna put it to Y-6, and now you can see that this is actually appearing as straight, at least for that piece here. So that makes it much easier then for us to work with that reference. And later we're just gonna put that -6 back to 0 so that we have our old position back. So there's a random thing that I want to do. I want to go into our viewport themes once more, and I want to increase the vertex size. I'm gonna put that to 4, and I think that this will make it a bit easier for you to see what I'm doing. I should have probably done that from the beginning, but this is just something that I was thinking about earlier. So now you see hopefully a bit better the vertex points here, because they are double the size as before. So I'm gonna make a bevel here in the middle and then push that over like this, followed by a subdivision here, which we can then drag up like that here, the vertex points. So let's also take these vertex points and let's push it so that this looks like it's perfectly aligned here, like that this is one straight continuous shape on both these sides. And I just want to dissolve these edges here on the left side. On the right side, however, we have these steps. So I'm gonna connect it like that. Actually, steps is the wrong word, but we're gonna have some depth there in form of a curve. I'm gonna select these faces now here at the front and extrude it further out. So that automatically gives us a new segment. And now let's take a look at it here. Both at the left side and the right side, we have a bit of a different shape here. So this is why we had to extrude it out once more. And now we can select this face here on the left side and simply drag it like that over here to the right side. And then we select individually this vertex point and we want to align it here on this edge according to our reference image. Now I'm gonna dissolve this edge here. We're gonna make that look better in a moment, but let's also select this edge loop here. And actually, let's connect it like that here first. And then let's select this edge loop. And let's just dissolve that. Now, let's look at it from the front view once more. And then you see the silhouette there on the reference. Let's make that so that this looks like a continuous path here. So this vertex point here, let's select that and let's connect that down here. So next we can also dissolve this edge here, these two edges, because they don't really contribute much here to our overall flow. So now let's take a look at it from the top view. Let's bring that a little closer here to the right side, and the same here for these points. So let's bring that over here. Now I'm gonna switch to edge mode, and from that edge on I select over here, so we have 4 edges in total, and then let's just one by one bring these steps here to the left side so that we get that shape of a continuous edge here. The last one we're gonna move with the vertex, and now if you look at this edge here, we have one continuous flow. So that way we get that nice shape in there. And now we're gonna do the same thing here on the other side, just slightly different. Let's position that vertex point a bit more aligned to the other one on top of it. And let's add some subdivision here. And now we can take this selection here at the front into the top perspective and pretty much do the same thing that we were just doing on the other side, where we do it step by step. So with control we can take away from our current selection. Want to do the same thing here and basically just make sure that this edge flow creates a nice curve here. So this is already getting into that direction. So if we look at it here from the front, one thing I want to do is select these vertex points and go to our vertex slide and space that out a bit here to the left side. Let's select this edge loop here, and I want to give that a bevel to make that a bit more curvy on top. And another thing I want to do with a bevel is to dissolve this edge as well as this edge. And now we can select this loop here. And let's give this a bevel with 2 segments. That will just help to make it a bit more smooth looking as opposed to having this angle there. So I'm just going to reconnect these vertex points. And then we can go over here to our snapping mode. And first of all, let me go to the isolation mode and we can delete everything here at the back side. So let's delete these faces because we will never see those. And now we can go into snapping and let's just bring these points here to one connection. This one here as well over to the other side. And that way we have that optimized here. On a second thought, I'm actually going to add that face back here at the back because we need it for the remeasure action later on. And then we can still delete it for the low poly. And I think this is the last time that I'm going to make use of one of these screws here, which ultimately later I'm going to delete, and then we do that in Substance Painter. But I think this is the last one where I'm using it here. And then what we can do is take our reference image and put that back to 0 here on the y-axis. But that means that we also have to rotate this piece now a little bit. Let's bring it into position and then we can just rotate it a few degrees here. So that way we get that all back into place here. And it would have been much more work if we have left the reference image here in its original angle without this rotation. That way we would have had to construct everything with this slight angle on it. And this would have cost us more time and work than doing this simple rotation on it. So just something to consider for some cases where this might make sense. And now we can carry on here by connecting these vertex points. Let's connect these points together here so that we don't have any n-gon there. It's all quads now for the most parts. And one thing I want to do here on these vertex points is go back here to our vertex slide and just even that out a bit more here in between these upper faces. So one thing I forgot to do earlier was to merge by distance, so that removes another 4 vertices here on it. So before we start working on our hammer, let's just make sure that you have a quick pivot here assigned to this object so that it's conveniently sliding from the right to the left. So you just want to make sure that the pivot is somewhat centered there on that object. Now let's select these two faces, duplicate, snap back, and then let's separate that selection and let's select that. And the reason for that is that this already gives us a good start base here for our hammer. I'm gonna make an inset into it, then reverse the selection with Ctrl I and delete the surrounding faces. Let me add the quick origin so that this is easier here for us to work with it. And then let's position it so that it somewhat aligns there with the silhouette on our reference image. And next, I want to select these vertex points and let's bring that up all the way to here. To make it a bit easier, I'm gonna delete the right side, so we're only having that side here, and I want to extrude it out like that. And then let's give it a rotation like that here on that face. And speaking of these faces, let's just get rid of them so that we're only concentrated here on the side view for now. And then later we can fill that back up. Let's bring that here more into position also on that side. And then let's extrude out a bigger face here on that part, as well as positioning that here where we have these points also visible on our reference image. So we're gonna just start with a rough shape and then we're gonna refine that. Just gonna get rid of that face here as well. Now let's extrude out more here on that side. And then we're gonna switch over here to our vertex mode. And then step by step, we're gonna extrude, shift our vertex points, and you want to keep it as low poly as possible at the beginning. That's usually the best approach. And then we can gradually bevel and make it higher poly. Such as, for example, here, let's select that and let's have a double bevel on that. And now we just want to make sure this is also properly aligned with our silhouette. Let's add another edge here, and this one here, let's also go over there and add a bevel with 2 segments. And now let's select these faces here and let's push that over here to the left side, because this is where our hammer has this extruded region that is sticking out a bit. So let's add a subdivision here, and then let's position that a bit more. And next we can select the edge here at the outer part and let's put that to 0. So that way, when we compare that with our reference, we can start working on this almost a bit triangular shape. So let's select these edges here individually, and then this is best to be done in the top view to work on that shape here. Let's also select that one, and let's also push that over a bit here to the left side. And now let's see how that looks like with our symmetry applied, so that we already get a better sense for the overall depth of it. And I'm thinking this starts looking about right. So now we can go over and do more refinements on some areas, such as here where we gotta work on that curvature. So same as before, let's start simple. Let's not add too many edges, and then we have an easier time to work on that shape by simply beveling it later on. So these vertex that we already have in place, let's also align that a bit better here. And now that I look at it here at the end of it, it looks a bit too pointy as opposed to what we have here on the reference image. So let's take this edge and then in the top view, let's bring that more like that here. Now let's just align it again and then let's give that a bevel to make that all a bit more smooth here with the overall edge flow. And often it's really just about making sure that silhouette stands before we do any further action. So take your time with that. And as usual, I also want to space that out more evenly here, so that these individual faces are not too close by each other. And then let's just bevel it like that here. So now we have that really nice and round. And over here, let's just add another extra edge. And let's push that here also to the front. So what I was just saying, that this shouldn't look so pointy, I'm actually thinking it's still a little bit too sharp there at the end. So let's select these vertex points here, aside from the last one, and then let's just push that all here like that. So that way we have that more circular and not so sharp. Now let's zoom out and let's select both the hammer and the reference image, and I want to take that into isolation view so that it's easier to see here for whatever we have left on it here, especially at the bottom part of it. But before we get to that, let's add another subdivision here. And then let's make that a nice curve. Now let's select that and we want to extrude out a few more parts here. So we're gonna work on that part here in a moment where we have this almost teeth looking kind of a shape. But before we do that, let's select these edges and then in edge mode, let's simply delete them. So that leaves us only here with the outer edges, and that makes it easier then to bevel them properly to make this more smooth. On that part here, let's be a bit more generous. I'm gonna add 4 or 3 segments. 4 vertex points equals 3 segments. And then let's make that a bit more even here on those. And we wanna also add an extra division here of 1 segment. Now the same can be done here. Let's just position that a bit better. And then let's select that, and we also want to bevel that with 1 segment. So now it's time to fill that back up here so that we can connect it. Let's select all the outer edges and then let's press F so that we get that all filled up here. And now it's just a matter of connecting that again. And then whenever we have that, we can take a look at what's left here on that hammer. And same as with the trigger, the reference image shows a bit the silhouette of the inner parts. But since we won't really be ever seeing all of that, we will keep it rather basic. Most importantly, we just have a little bit of geometry there, so that when we play the animation for when the revolver is actually shooting and the hammer comes back, that we do see that there is something. So for whatever is visible, we want to make sure we have that, and that includes that part here. So now let's also take that and let's extrude that down here. And for that, let's just take a look at this extruded region that we already have in place there, because we want to put that hammer a little bit under it, so that this is actually intersecting a little bit there at the bottom of it, and it's not just floating there. So now let's also take a look at that here, and we just want to push these vertex points as far as we can here to where we have this extruded region. And after positioning these vertex points here a bit more, let's then select these edges here and let's delete them, so that once again we're left only here with the outer shapes, and that enables us then to do a nice bevel on it. So I'm gonna have 7 segments on that. And I actually also want to have this curve. It might be a bit hard to see on the reference image, but I'm just gonna fill everything back up. And now let's make connections like that here. And then let's have a knife cut down here. Let's press enter. And then this vertex point, let's bring that up. And now just get rid of this edge here and let's give that a bevel so that we have this teeth kind of a look there. So I'm just going to bring that up a bit. It's a bit hard to see there in the background. You may want to zoom in on the reference image individually. But that way we have this looking more realistic here. I'm just going to fill that back up so that we can connect it in just a moment. Just gonna push that up a bit and then let's take it into isolation and let's fill that gap that we have there at the upper part. So I'm gonna select this edge and then with control all the way to the upper side, and then let's extrude out a region. And what we can do is just simply snap it back then, pull it out again, and then let's align it on the x-axis as x and 0. And I just want to turn off the merge and the clipping on our mirror modifier because that kind of interferes with it. Now let's align it again, and then we put it to 0 here on the x coordinates. And for whatever reason, we got some issue here with the alignment. So I want to toggle off the mirror here for the moment. Select all these vertex points, say S, X, and 0, and then let's confirm it at the transformation property so that everything is perfectly at 0. And now I'm just gonna give this edge a quick origin once more. So that way we know it's perfectly at 0. And I'm gonna delete the mirror modifier and simply put it back on once we're in object mode. Let me just turn off merge and clipping on the mirror modifier. And now what we can also do is fill up the other regions. So let's do pretty much the same thing that we were just doing. I'm gonna take these edges here all the way through to the other side, but in order to make that selection proper, we have to do it sort of like in steps to tell Blender sort of like, look, this is the way we want that flow to go. And then by pressing Control, we add to it. So whenever we have that, we can then again do the extrusion, then simply snap back, drag it out a bit, say S, X, and 0, and then we can put it to 0. That's why we have to disable the merge and the clipping on the mirror modifier, or else that gets kind of messed up. So now we have that. And we still have a bit more of connections to do here on that part. So let's go to vertex mode. And then let's carry on by doing our usual connections here. So we don't have exactly the same vertex points at the top that we have at the bottom, but that doesn't matter. Let's just connect it like that here. In some parts we have triangles, but everything gets triangulated anyway later on. People are always so worried about triangles, and there's really no point for it. So here, this is a little bit too dense. I'm simply going to dissolve that edge. Same as here. So now currently our pivot is at X, Y, and Z 0. So we want to make sure that we have that properly pivoted. And I'm going to add a subdivision here to that segment. And then let's select these two vertex points and let's assign our quick origin into the center of that. So now if we are pulling on that, it looks like it works perfectly. So around there, we want to have that pivot. And let's just double check it. It appears as if it's sort of like intersecting there. And in that case, what I'm going to do is drag only these vertex points down a bit. And now let's take a look at it again. And I'm thinking that should be fine now. So as long as we don't have an obvious intersection there and it swings nicely back and forth, this is what we want. Same as with the trigger, where we also had to adjust it a little bit to make it not intersect. So now let's get back to that piece, and you've already seen it on the reference image. We have a bit more work to do here. So let's take it into isolation mode, and then let's get rid of the right side so that it's easier for us to just focus on one. And we have quite a few of edges here that don't really contribute much. Let's select all of them and simply let's get rid of the faces. So now with all these edges here, let's do a bit of optimization. Let's select these 4 edges. We can add to a selection by pressing Shift, and then we're gonna collapse it. Same over here. And now I'm gonna put our snap mode back on, and then let's snap that over here to the right side. It doesn't necessarily look pretty there, but it's a flat surface, so it doesn't matter that we have a lot of triangles joining there in one place. So the same over here, let's drag that over to the left side in that case. And that way we already saved quite a few of polys. And now I'm gonna merge everything by distance. That removes 6 vertices in my case. And what we can also do is select these edges here. And then let's also collapse that. So what I want to do here is remove this loop. Doesn't really add anything. And then let's get out of the isolation so that we see where we have this intersection with our rear side. I'm gonna enable the edge slide, but let's get out of the snapping for that, so that we can bring that a bit closer here to that rear side. And now let's subdivide these edges here. And let's bring that down. And then we can simply delete these faces here, as well as connecting these vertex points. And then let's select them, all of them here at the bottom, and let's go back to isolation. And we want to extrude it, snap back, drag out, and then S, Y, and 0 to align it. And now would be a good time to put the snapping back on so that we can snap it here perfectly into place. So here on that side, let's also select these faces and let's drag them out. And the same thing, we want to align it as well as snapping it here into place. Is a little bit tricky sometimes with Blender and the snapping, but it works. Let me just undo that, and now we can join these edges here. And here let's join it like that, and then we can simply fill up the rest here. So now we have that bottom back, and we also have this detail added here where it's not intersecting any longer, but it's looking as we want it to be according to our reference image with this little gap there. So let's just compare that once more with our reference. And I'm thinking we should push it up a little bit further to make that more obvious since we already have it there. So I'm gonna select these two faces and then simply push it up a little bit further. I want to be out of the snapping mode. And now what we have to do is go over here. Let's select only this edge here. And then let's carefully bring that up so that this looks like it's properly aligned there. So on that end, we don't have this gap that we have on the other side, but this is pretty much touching the surface. So all we have to do is individually move these edges. Let's also push that one up a bit so that this is not actually intersecting, but almost. So as long as we see it hovering slightly above the surface, this is what we want on that rail here. I'm just gonna say it already in advance. There is still one thing that we have to fix on that rail. We're gonna do that later. But that was something that I noticed once I made a test bake a little bit later in the tutorial. But it's not a big deal. We can fix that in like 10 minutes. We will get to it later. For now, let's focus on working on our reflex scope. So let's switch out the reference image and let's start with a cube here. You can see here it's 46 millimeters and 27 millimeters here. When we look at it from the top, as well as 35 millimeters here from our front view as a total height. But let's start with a side view. And for that, we're gonna put it to 46 millimeters. So that is already the total length here as seen from the side. And now we can individually change the coordinates here for X and for Z. Let's make that 27 and 35. So now let's simply position that cube here, that box, where we have it fitting our reference image. And that is basically step one. That way we already have that mostly in position. Later, when we're done with the scope, we have to select it and pull it up a little bit so that it fits the rail properly. But for now, we can just use this reference here. And let's start with a subdivision through it. And then we have this line here already in place to define this angle. And now let's add another edge. Let's select the whole loop. And we want to switch over here to our edge slide. So that allows us to slide it like that without moving the other vertex points. And then let's add another one here. And while we are still in that edge slide, let's position that here to that line. So this is the basic groundwork that we have to do. Now we can go over here and simply pull that vertex a little bit to the right. And then we have this bevel here. And we can take that into account by simply adding another subdivision. And again, while being in this edge slide mode, let's drag that up here so that we don't move the other topology around. So now let's hide the rail that we have there. I should have already given everything names so that it's easier for you to see, but we can simply select it and then whatever gets highlighted, we can then hide. We're gonna give it all proper names later. Sometimes as we work on it, it can be a little annoying to give names and then we detach things and then the names change. So sometimes I just like to keep it with the basic solid names like cube, cylinder, however they come in, and then later we can assign the names. Not only can, but we have to. So I'm gonna go further here and add a few more edges. Same principle as before. This one here, let's align that. And now let's drag that over here to that side where we have this edge. So let's add another one here. This one we can simply drag up like that. And now with our knife tool, let's cut over here. Same thing here on that side. And now let's make a subdivision here through the center of everything so that we can delete the right side, and we're only focusing here on that left side for now. So now let's delete a few faces, and that way we already have a little bit more here, that silhouette. Let's dissolve these edges here, and now let's connect it over like that. And then we can also dissolve that edge. So let's also get rid here of this edge loop on that side. We actually don't need that one. Now let's add our mirror modifier back on. And I think that this is where I realize that the pivot always gets reset back to 0, 0, 0. XYZ, but in order to fix that, we can then select this edge here and add a quick origin. So that way we can easier move that around. Let's make an instance with Alt D, not Shift D, but an actual instance with Alt D, and let's rotate it around 90 degrees so that we're basically looking at it here from the front. Now let's position it as close as we can here onto that reference. It's missing the bottom part, but that doesn't matter. We're only concerned here for that upper region for now. Let's drag that vertex point over here, and now let's add a subdivision here through the center then, and let's simply drag that up a bit here. So now what we can do is make a bevel on it. And I'm gonna have a couple of divisions here, 4 segments. Now the problem is that we don't have that as a continuous flow here anymore, but there's an easy way to fix that. We're simply gonna go back here to that one, and then with a knife tool, let's cut all the way here over to the top, and then we can simply delete the leftover parts. So that way this is perfectly straight and according to our reference. And speaking of which, let's take a look at this area here. And we also want to have a nice bevel on that in order to make that round. So I'm gonna fill that back up like that, only temporary. And then I'm gonna delete these edges here, so that this is easier here for us to bevel. And I'm gonna do that individually here on each side. Gonna have 4 segments here on the left, and here on that one, let's also have a bevel. And then we can just join that back together here. Let's select these edges and let's fill that. And then also here the big part. Let's fill that back up, and then we can delete this face here at the top. So now remember, we have an instance here. Let's dissolve this edge, and then we want to collapse the mirror modifier. And for that we have to say apply to all objects, so that the instance also does the same thing. And now we want to make a selection for everything that is open here. And then let's press F to fill that, and let's snap to our side view. And while we are in our transparency mode, we simply press J. So that way we connect these vertex points. Let's do that everywhere. I'm also gonna add it here And then we have this already in position so that we can do further work here also on the inner parts of it. I'm gonna actually delete that edge loop that we had there in the center for now. And I want to get rid of the mirror modifier here on that instance that was still on there, but it's working as you can see. It's still an instance. I'm gonna copy this part here, separate it out, and then let's get that a quick origin to the center of it. Now, this face already has the width that we can then work with. Let's make that a bit smaller here. Squeeze that on the y-axis. And now I'm gonna go over here. I just opened my transformation settings so that you can roughly see my numbers here, but just, you know, base it on the reference image. So we bring it up like that here. And now I'm gonna do a bevel on these vertex points. Control B followed by V like Victor. I should say V like vertex because that's probably what they thought for that shortcut. Now let's do the same thing here. Let's do a vertex bevel. And then we can add more to that here. Let's be generous here with the amount. I'm having 7 segments here for that. And then let's also select these 2 vertex points and let's also give them a bit of a bevel. So here having 2 segments should be enough to make that a bit more round.